So, welcome back. As you can see, we have Wayne McRoy with us. And today we are going to talk about the mystery schools. Yeah, the mystery schools. Would you agree, Wayne, that the mystery schools had their origins in Atlantis?
Well, we could look as far back as we could see in human history, and the mystery schools have been present. Now, many of them do claim that they had their origins and their relationship back to ancient Atlantis. That's where they claim most of their teachings and information comes from, is through the Atlantean root races, the last root race of the Atlanteans, actually, before it converted or evolved into modern man, what we see in the modern era. All of this knowledge has been passed down through these various conduits, and these mystery schools are central to that. And we could trace them as far back in written history as we could find. They've been present in ancient Egypt, and that is where they found a lot of what many scholars in the occult say that's where they found their perfection, is in the Egyptian mysteries. And we have all different types of mysteries attached to different mythological systems throughout all of cultures and time back in antiquity. So they all have the same core tenets at the base of them. And what this boils down to is the difference between the esoteric and the exoteric. And there was this secret priestcraft class that has existed through the course of time that has kept these esoteric secrets. Now, these are the doctrines, the secret doctrines that they've brought forward. And the outer trappings of all of that depend on which specific mythology they attach it to. So that's why you have things like the Egyptian mysteries, the Eleusian mysteries, the Bacchic mysteries, all of these different types of organizations through the time, or external types of worship, for lack of better terminology, that's given that the masses of people would flock to in those different regions and cultures. And inside of all of that is the esoteric teaching. That's the secret teaching only for those who are the elites of the world, the secret priest class within, that know the secrets and use these secrets to manipulate all of the worshippers of the various cults. So this is where a lot of that ties from, the claim that it goes back to ancient Atlantis. And there are some interesting and fundamental teachings that align with that. And there are certain things, bits of information, that are actually good bits of knowledge and information that give a better understanding of the natural working of things that go back through that. But a lot of it's been twisted and contorted by many of these within this priest class that were looking for worldly power for themselves. They wanted to have that advantage over people, control over people, and to keep the mysteries of these various old occult sciences and alchemical sciences hidden from the rest of the world, so that they could use that to their advantage and maintain their position of power or authority in this world. And we've seen this. This has been carried forward even into today, although the trappings look a little different than they did back then. So they do claim their origins in Atlantis, and there are certain things that are said to come from Atlantis within those various orders. And we could see that translated into the modern secret society groups that draw their lineage from these old mystery schools of antiquity. So, just a little breakdown for people. The original intention of what's called the mysteries has really been misapplied by those people who have wielded power over the esoteric knowledge. And this is wherein things became problematic. What they've done is they've misused this knowledge for themselves, and they've inverted what the original context was. And this is wherein it causes confusion today. Now, in the original intention of the introduction of what they called the mysteries back in these old schools, this was a type of individual type of worship that was done for each individual person. This was your personal relationship with God or the Creator that was involved in these mysteries, as they had called them. Now, this is different from what the collective worship is called, and that was called religion. This is where we have this distinction between esoteric and exoteric. The esoteric, this is the individual relationship one has with the Creator, and this is where they actually learn and do their worship and gain their spiritual grounding is in this individualized experience that is the mysteries, compared to this corporate type of worship, which is religion. And this is the exoteric form that was introduced to the masses. And the priest class of antiquity kept the esoteric side hidden. They didn't want the people to have that right connection back to source, back to God, back to the creator. So they kept all of that to themselves, or the knowledge thereof to themselves. And in so doing, what they did is they twisted and inverted the whole process. And they made the focus, the main focus, the exoteric form, or the religious worship, that external communal worship, the collective worship. That is where they put all the emphasis into everything. And then they came up with all of these different doctrines based on that. And people miss the whole point entirely, because the whole important aspect to the spiritual side of this is your individual connection to God, to the Creator, to that prima causa, if you want to call it that. There's different terms you could apply to this, but the whole point is the important facet is the individual relationship, not the collective relationship. And they put all the focus on the collective version, and they made this outward appearance the more important aspect to it. And it's really not. It misses the whole point. When you have this collective body that comes together and congregates to worship together in unison these ideas, this leaves no place for the individual. It was all about snuffing out individuation or individuality out of the equation, whereas the mysteries were all about this individuation process and this relationship between man and his creator individually. And instead, they transferred it to the exoteric form of worship, this collective worship, and put the focus on that, and made that so that that seemed to be where people believed they needed to be in order to have that right standing or right relationship with their creator, is they needed to congregate and go to church, or whatever you want to call it. They needed to go together with the organization, and they needed to follow the dictates and dogmas of that organization in order to be in right standing with God or their creator, when nothing could be further from the truth. The important aspect has always been the individual relationship with God, from just this connection between the person themselves and their creator, without all the intermediary stuff and without all the dogmatic ritual involved. So this is what's been done and has been misapplied by those within the auspices of the priest class, because they wanted to centralize more power and control to themselves. They wanted worldly power for themselves, and they wanted to maintain that control over people. And they made all kinds of different dogmatic rules for these people to follow. And they did. And this gave them kind of more incentive to keep doing what they were doing. And then you had all these different systems emerged based upon these different mythologies or mythological archetypes that were still using the same esoteric principles at the center, but giving a different exoteric version of it on the surface. And we still see some portion of this going on today. So just wanted to explain or lay down the difference between the mysteries and religion, because this is where the distinction is. So the mysteries, that's individualized worship. That's what the original intention was. The religion was the collective worship. And the collective worship should be secondary to the individualized one, but they've inverted that. And that's where we have the problem in the modern era. And we have these secret society groups have emerged also and taken hold of these ideas and established themselves in that way as well. And they've infiltrated into all major religions and all major religious structures and belief systems throughout the course of humanity that we have recorded. And I don't know if I got off topic from where you wanted to go here, but I think it was important to down with the outset of all of this. But they do claim a lot of teachings back from the Atlantean culture, that Atlantean subrace that existed before modern iterations of humanity. So I don't know if you wanted to explore that avenue of thought first, or if you wanted to like link this to things going on right now, or where you wanted to proceed from there.
I remember that I did quite a while ago, I did an interview with Gary Wayne about antediluvian Freemasonry. And so I could imagine that, you know, little bits and pieces went also into these mystery schools that the ancients, when we started recording it. So I would not be surprised if, you know, yes, they say they have their roots in Atlantis, but I wouldn't be too surprised if, it's much, much older even than Atlantis.
Oh, I would say it most certainly is. I mean, we could only look back so far in
Mm.
the historical record of the things we know. But there are those who practice what are called the soul sciences, or these older alchemical sciences and ways of thinking, these spiritual sciences, that claim that they can have more information about this. Like they could read what they call the Akashic record. They could use clairvoyant abilities to see into the Akashic and understand certain things, aspects of things that have happened in the past and past iterations of mankind. So you could probably trace this back even further just by using that means of information gathering as well. And these are some of the claims that have been made, and like the Rosicrucians, among other esoteric societies, maintain some of these records of all of this stuff. So you can trace it back to Atlantis, but then you could even trace it back further to previous iterations of humanity. The Lemurians are the predecessors of the Atlanteans, and then you also have the other. There's two other epochs before the Lemurian epoch. One was the Hyperborean epoch, and one was the Polarian epoch, where different iterations of mankind had emerged at those points. So you could trace all of this back through the foundational roots, and this goes back into the various time periods as well, these different revolutions and cycles of time that are recorded by many of the different philosophical organizations. Like in the Eastern cultures, they call these the Vedas, and there's various other names for these different cycles of time. In the Rosicrucian system, they call these epochs of time, or eras, or revolutions. They have these different factions, different parts of the different cycles that seem to go around in a circle over and over through the seven different iterations and seven different parts. And we repeat these different cycles, but there were previous iterations of mankind that existed in these prior periods, and they were completely different than we are today. But the roots of the spiritual teachings and stuff like that can be derived through all of those different time periods and brought forward. So you could say this goes all the way back to the beginning, goes back to source, if you want to go that far back. But as far as the records, the written historical accounts we have now in this modern iteration of mankind, the furthest we could look back is to like the Egyptian, Babylonian, these type of cultures. And before that, there are claims made about the Atlantean cultures in all of these different places that we could look at and draw upon. But that's about as far back as we could look objectively in like real world scientific terms here to see where these records emerge from. But the mystery schools have been with us for as long as we've been around. And that's probably the easiest way to think about it. Modern man has always had some version of the mystery schools present. And many of the teachings of this have been absent now in the modern day. At least the original intentions behind it are absent here in the modern day. And that's wherein we have this separation from spiritual matters and spiritual concerns. We once had much better spiritual sight as a species, and we don't have that anymore. We've lost that because that's part of the individuation process that we've been evolving through, and our gradual stepping down into full physicality, dense physicality here through the various systems. And this is well described in the Rosicrucian system. That's why I always try to go back to that. There's different terminology used by the different occult schools that apply these same principles, but it's all the same thing, really, at the end of the day. But I find the Rosicrucian view of it the most easily explainable, so I always hearken back to that. But essentially, we have this evolutionary process, is what they say, from the ancient roots of man through these various iterations into modern man. And many of the important spiritual subcontexts get communicated through these mystery teachings through the course of time. And they always trace their roots back to Atlantis because there was a golden age at the end of the Atlantean period. And that's the important thing that they always try to harken back to. So I hope I'm not losing
Yeah.
anybody.
Um, when you ask Dr. Google, Dr. Google answers that the oldest mystery school is the Eleusium, but I don't think that is correct because that is ancient Greece, and there definitely have been older schools in Egypt, for instance, and in Babylon. So, no, I wouldn't say that is correct.
That may be the earliest one we have written historical records
Yeah.
of, but they certainly they predate that by a long shot. There's always been this oral tradition that's been passed down through the course of time, and it even predates writing. Like that's the thing, the spoken word predates writing. So you've had oral traditions even before that time that they actually recorded this stuff. So it's hard to really pin down an exact date as to when this idea first emerged. It's always been with us. That's the easiest way to think about it. And it predates even modern man. And that's the other thing that's astounding because they had their own iterations of the mystery teachings in Atlantis too. If you go back and you try to delve into the Atlantean history and stuff like that. And now, don't get me wrong. Much of what we have that they call the history of Atlantis and all of this stuff is what you would consider some of this more questionable type of data because this is either like channeled data or people claiming they have the clairvoyant ability to see into the Akashic record and pull this information out. Now, does that mean that it's total nonsense? No, absolutely not. But can we prove it? No, because we don't have a written account or a way to objectively prove this stuff in the modern era. But this has been presented by multiple people who claim to have this ability and no connection one to another. So a lot of it corresponds. So if you have multiple people saying the same thing that have no connection one to another, and they claim they're able to do this, maybe there is an element of truth to that. But they claim that the Atlantean cultures also had some type of an iteration of mystery schools or the separation between the external form of worship and the internalized form of worship, the individualized version of this, where they had the esoteric teachings and the exoteric teachings. So this concept really predates modern humanity by quite a bit, and it's hard to really pin down an exact date on that. And people in our day and age are always looking for objective measurements of everything, objective dates and times for everything, timestamps for everything, and that's not always present throughout the historical cycles of things. Like I said, it's a known commodity even by modern historians and record keepers that there was a time when man didn't keep any written records, and there's a long span of time where everything was passed down in oral tradition. And we have some of these traditions that later on got written down in the form of text or some such thing and recorded that way. But they were talking about things from way, way back, and we don't even know how far back. So it's hard to tell. But people are all about objective times and dates and all of this stuff in the modern era. And we can't always apply that across the board with this, especially when you realize that conditions here on Earth haven't always been what they are now. And they
Yeah.
always come by the assumption things have always been how they are now, and that's not the case. If you go back and you look at these records of, say, Atlantis, the Earth conditions in ancient Atlantis were much different than they are today. It's said by the people that have researched this and put information out, and this comes from multiple sources, like I said, that are disconnected from one another. So it's there might be some air of truth to it. I always consider that if it's multiple sources that it comes from that are saying the same things and they have no connection one to another, that makes it more probable that what they're saying has some truth to it. So they claim that in ancient Atlantis, the atmosphere was different, that the air was more infused with a watery type element. Now, does that mean the air is water? No, it means it was far denser and it was different than it is now. And you'll find even Christian apologists have talked about this and stuff in the past as far as the existence of giants in the biblical record and stuff like this. they said conditions were different in the past, that the earth had a canopy at that time, a water canopy, and this was the waters above, the waters below, this kind of thing. So conditions were different, and this allowed life forms to grow to a much larger size because it made the air more dense and more compacted and made oxygen more readily available and absorbable by the beings of that time frame. So that's why they say things like dinosaurs existed and we had all these giant creatures and stuff like that, and the record of all these giant plant growths and stuff in the fossil record. So you have all of that, but if you go back to the mystery school teachings and through these secret society groups and the things that they tell us about ancient Atlantis, this is one of the main things that they said. The atmosphere was different. Conditions were different. So that allowed them to access technologies and stuff that we can't do today. This is why we have the elements out there in some of these old cities and stuff we found, old places like Baalbek and all of these other ones with these massive monoliths and stuff like that. They said, the people who've recorded some of this claim that at the time they had these different technologies wherein they could just float things through the air because of the density of the air and the more watery element to the air. So they were able to utilize like levitation devices of sorts that functioned in that environment that don't function now. And this explains why some of these lost ancient technologies, as they talk about in many of the circles, we can't seem to really find anything now that corresponds exactly, but we do know they've been talked about, and we know that certain things have happened. And why don't they function now the same as they did then? Because conditions are different now, and this is something we need to consider. And I know I got a little off topic there, but I've always found this notion of Atlantis and all of the things surrounding it very fascinating, because when you dig deep into what's been recorded by the secret schools about this is the kind of stuff you find, and it offers us a plausible explanation as to things like, were there cultures in the past that were technologically advanced? Yes, it seems that there were, but the technologies they were using at that point are different than what we have now out of necessity, because they worked differently in the conditions that were different. And those same technologies won't work for us now with the conditions we have now. So this gives an awful lot of explanation as to how it is some of these old monuments and stuff maybe got put in place and built and all of this stuff was done, because there was this ancient advanced culture. But the conditions of the earth were different, so it allowed them to do things we simply can't do today. And I find that hugely fascinating in and of itself. And all of this is hidden away in some of these ancient mystery school teachings. So this is stuff most people don't hear about. And we have that claim back to this Atlantean element once again. So when they're hearkening back to Atlantis, this is their callback card to the golden age of mankind, when we were a technologically advanced society, a worldwide society, and they were able to do things that we simply can't do today with our modern technologies. So all of that is all bound up in this too. So it is a fascinating topic for sure. So as
Mm.
far as claims back to Atlantis, that's what all of them claim, and they have some of these records that they supposedly were able to channel through the Akashic record and stuff to know some things about it. And these are some of the claims that are made. So you could make of that what you will. It's not my business to tell you what to think, but I'm just telling you what it is that they put on the record with this stuff. So
Yeah.
it's interesting.
So when we look at the Atlantean time line, then they also say that essentially the mystery schools were the central institution of Atlantis, and all other institutions like government, economy, religion, they all orbited around that. And but the problem started, as you said, when the priesthood corrupted the knowledge and tried to hoard the knowledge for themselves, and only recognized mystery schools that were very closely attached to themselves. And it went as far as even holding back knowledge from the political elite. Yeah. And that is where things went sideways.
Yeah, now it is recorded through the Hermeticists and from other different organizations and groups that have claimed to have been able to gather these records through the Akashic record that what happened in the end phases of the Atlantean culture is this priest class, they kind of got a dark unction to them. They started to manipulate things for their own greedy gains, and they started using black magic. And it was this introduction of black magic at this point that led to the fall of Atlantis. This is what they claim. So this is what catastrophically caused Atlantis to get buried beneath the sea and to eventually crumble and disappear. And that's what the claim is through these various groups. So it was, I think, the sixth Atlantean race, the seventh being the final race. The sixth Atlantean race is the one that started delving into the black magic, and this is when that golden age kind of turned really sour really fast. And that's when we have this worldwide cataclysm that buried Atlantis beneath the waves and kind of reset the entire world order at that time. And only remnants of the seventh Atlantean race went on and became the first race of modern humanity in the times of antiquity. And all of this occurred at the end phases of what the Rosicrucians describe as the moon revolution of the Earth period. And we are now in the Earth revolution of the Earth period. So it's at that transitional point between those two junctions in the timeline when all of this occurred, and we had the collapse of the old Golden Age civilization that was the Atlantean worldwide empire, and then we had the emergence of all of these other cultures that we're familiar with today. This would be our modern precursors of humanity that we recognize in the historical timelines that we have objectively here today. So then you have the emergence of these various cultures that have carried forward some of these mystery traditions through their various mythologies, like the Egyptians, the Eleusinians, all of these different mystery school teachings and mystery school cults, if you want to call them that. They carried forward some of this information esoterically within the auspices of the inner portions of the organization, and they express this with their external exoteric form to the other masses in the area that ascribe to their belief system. So you had all of this emerged from that, and a lot of the corruption was carried forward through that from the old Atlantean times. And this is wherein a lot of things have been really twisted and turned on their head. And we could see how it's been brought forward today. You've always had this special interest group that seems to view themselves as the elites of this world, and they want to keep information hidden from the rest of us to give themselves an advantage over us. So it's the same type of archetype that carries over today.
Mm. I mean, to a certain degree, not only do we have secret societies and certainly mystery schools, but to a certain degree, we also, let's say you want to become a really good physicist. Yeah, well, there is no way around it. You have to study physics. Um, and that is knowledge that will cost you a bit. Hmm? And some end up with really huge student loans. But you have knowledge that not everybody has. It is available to you, but you have to go through certain steps. So I don't have a problem with, making it available, but you need to put an effort into it as well. What I do have a problem with is willingly withholding information that you think that is only for me and my best buddies, because that is not only corrupted, it is also very, very arrogant. And only bad things can come from that. Nothing good can ever come out of this attitude.
Right. Kennedy said secrecy is repugnant, and we have this
Yeah.
faction in society that has been keeping all of these secrets. And certainly, why do they keep it secret? Like, what is the whole point of keeping something secret, especially when they claim that this knowledge is for the benefit of humanity? Why keep it secret then? If it's good for everybody, make it available to whoever is seeking it, and that's what they claim to do. It's only if you come and you're looking for it that they'll share that with you, but they keep it close-fisted very much, and they won't share everything unless they consider you worthy or you're some type of an initiate within their order. And it's only these ones at the highest, most levels that know some things that decide who they're going to share that knowledge with. And I don't think that's necessarily right. They do oftentimes withhold this within these organizations, and they lead people astray. And they do this purposely. And this is acknowledged. This is even in writing in their own literature, that they purposely mislead their students at the lower levels into believing certain things that aren't true, that they know aren't true, just to keep them on the hook with them. And that's not right. I mean, if this information is for the benefit of all humanity, why keep it secret? But this is certainly the element that they use. And they'll always use the excuse, well, don't cast your pearls before swine. That only goes so far, in my view. And I really hate that misuse of scripture in that way, because that is what they misuse it for. They use it as an excuse because they don't want to let this certain person know this certain bit of information, because it doesn't benefit them, or they lose some kind of power or authority if they share that information. So they keep that hidden, and they'll use that "don't cast your pearls before swine" statement as an excuse for why they do that. And yeah, I understand not everybody's going to pick up on this stuff and understand what's being conveyed, but I think it's their prerogative that it should be available to them if they want it. And much of what's happened is these mystery schools and secret society groups have decided they're only going to let these people know certain things once they get to a certain level within their organization, and they've hijacked the whole process of initiation and turned it into a synthetic form from a natural form. And this is all part and parcel of what goes on, and why we have this one size fits all occultism today that's come forward, that's a total inversion of what the original intention was behind a lot of it. And that's where we're at, and that's why it's all of these dark powers above that are running things in this world. They've inverted it all and like kept the power and the information for themselves and hidden it away from the masses, and only choose to share certain bits of it that benefit them. And they've misused and misapplied a lot of these natural science principles that they know from antiquity to leverage things into their favor. Things like simply timing things to what's going on in the sky. They've tried to condition us to thinking astrology is nonsense and hokum, but it's not. There's a lot to that. There are
Yeah.
natural energetic influences that affect us here on Earth that we can observe in the sky and know some things about. But they don't want us to understand that because they leverage that themselves for certain things. Now, we're coming up this weekend on February 8th, and this is a very important date for a number of reasons. So we have not only the Super Bowl here in the United States going on, of course, but just recently in the Epstein files that were released, they were talking about in the Epstein files this date, February 8th, 2026, being the start of World War III in one of the email exchanges. I don't know if you saw that, but that's something that surfaced now, too, just this past week. And then NASA was supposedly sending a crew back to space in Artemis 2 in their rockets to the moon, to orbit the moon, supposed to be launching February 8th originally. I don't know if they delayed that. I think I saw something that they may have delayed it till the first week of March now, but that was what the date was for this. And always these moonshot rituals align with these various dates. So there's something important about this February 8th, 2026 date that's coming up here this weekend. So we'll watch and see what happens, if there's anything that's going to be world shaking on the world stage here with that. But I'm interested to see what happens, because that's three different reference points or important things that seem to be revolving around that particular date that has come out in the recent news cycle. So there's a reason for that. So there's some type of energetic influence at play on that day that they're trying to leverage for something. I don't know what that's going to look like. Only time will tell. We'll have to watch and see.
Yeah. And in February, we will have another very interesting astrological event. We will have Saturn conjunct, no, Saturn conjunct Neptune. Oh, meine Güte. Neptune. And it happens at 0 degrees in Aries. Aries is the beginning of the zodiac, and 0 degrees is the beginning of the beginning. And the last time we had that was in 8000 BC. And what did we see there? Yeah, well, agriculture came to the forefront, hunter and gatherers. That was an outdated model, and the megalithic era started, and on it goes. So it was a huge shift. I'm not saying that at that particular day, earth-shaking events will occur, but it is a starting point. Yeah.
Right. And we're seeing a lot of this symbological referencing in February here. There's a lot of things happening this month now pointing to this energetic influence that comes from the sky clock and from the broader universe at large, if you want to call it that. So we're seeing a lot of these different energies at play, and we're seeing how these world controllers are manipulating these energies. Now, another important date that I see coming up is just 9 days after this February 8th date. Of course, 9 is a completion number in some of the numerological systems. And that's February 17th, which is the Chinese New
It's
Year.
8 again.
Exactly. Plus, it's also an 8, and it's the Chinese New Year. And of course, it's the year of the fire horse. And you could see all the martial energies and Aries based energies inherent in that. And this actually encodes even the red horse of the book of Revelation, the revelation of the red horse in the apocalypse literature, as we see, which is war. It's about war. And of course, we've seen all these things happening on the world stage right now, leading up to this war situation. And it's encoded. Now it's come out in these Epstein emails this past week. It just hit the news cycle within the past week, where this is one of the things that was found in the release, this mentioning of February 8th, 2026 being the start of World War III. And I find that intriguing. It's all these same energies being leveraged in this way. So they're trying to do a great reset, and they're trying to go about that by inciting violence and using this archetype of the fire horse, the red horse, to do so. And this is an important element in all of it as well. So you see the archetypes present. You see the energetic influence of the Mars energies, the Aries energies present. It's about war. It's about reset. It's about large scale violence as a means to get there. And I think we're seeing the pre echoes of that right now in the culture wars going on, especially if you pay attention to mainstream media. They want you to believe that people are out there in large numbers committing violent atrocities in the street. And now we're seeing all of this stuff coming forward with these Epstein files telling us things that people like you and I have known for years and have been talking about for years. Well, now that's getting mainstream validation, and people are waking up to the fact that this world is indeed run by a pedophilic death cult. So it's something that people are going to have to really come to terms with. And I think it's going to be a shocking transformation going on starting now this month here of February in the new year, going into this year of the fire horse.
Hmm. You know what I could imagine? That originally the mystery schools started out as something good, and it was something that was taught in the temples. And yes, if you wanted to know about it, you had to go there, you had to listen, you had to study. And then came a phase where a lot of that, a lot of the teachings were inverted, were corrupted, and hidden. And that is what essentially derailed the entire thing. Could you imagine that has happened?
That's exactly what all of my research into these topics has shown. The original intention was good. I mean, there were good, solid things associated with that. Like I said, the mysteries originally, this was intended to be man's individualized worship to the Creator. And it was this communion, this relationship, this personal one-on-one relationship with God in an individuated way. And it was good, and it was based upon natural law principles, and it was based upon real, true things in the natural world. Well, all of that got muddied and perverted by this priest class that was entrusted to be the ones to bring this information forward. And I don't know whether they were self-appointed, this priest class, or how this all came about, but they saw themselves as the arbiters of truth at that point. And they took the information and the teachings and some of the things they knew, and they twisted it to fulfill their own personal agendas and put themselves in positions of prominence and power. And this, of course, has been done since then, and it's continued ad nauseum. So you always have this elitist class within society who thinks they have some divine right to rule, or that the world owes them and that they should be the ones in charge because they know better. They have some special knowledge, but that's only because they kept it hidden from everybody else, because they had access and they denied everybody else access. And you see how it's taken on this whole frame of mind that doesn't intentionally belong there originally. So this is the thing. That's exactly what's been done. They've taken this thing, these old mysteries, which were actually beautiful and good and well intentioned, and they've turned them into something totally opposite of that. So this, in my view, is what the true definition of Satanism really is. It's the inversion principle. And this is exactly what's been done through the course of time. And we see it ad nauseum today. They still do these things in certain degrees or other. And we've lost a lot of knowledge along the way. Knowledge about natural science principles, alchemical science principles, things that were once more commonly known and held by people at large, that now are thought to be total nonsense when it's not the case. There is an element of truth to many of these old teachings, but they've been misapplied, misused, and misappropriated by these people in positions of power, these self-appointed elitists who run things.
Hmm.
So there's all of that.
And sometimes these days, they even go as far as jailing you for calling out their nonsense. I just recently read an article where a UK teacher has been jailed because he refused to call a boy a girl or the other way around. Anyway, he didn't use the correct pronoun, and he went to jail for that. And then on the other hand, you have rapists and, knife attackers and what have you, all running around free, but the teacher has to go to jail. So that to me is Satanism one on one.
Exactly. Woe to him who calls good evil and evil good. That's what it says in the Bible, in the scriptures about this. And it's true, and we see that all around. So think about that logically. So this guy, he offended somebody's sensibilities because they believe there's something they're not. And he has to go to jail because he offended them. But it's okay for actual criminals that do violent things to other people to run free, simply because, well, they're from some outside place and they don't belong here in the first place. But how dare you be so racist and to call that out? Think about that. It is. It's the inversion principle at play. It's absurdity on the face of it. And this world we're living in is just becoming more and more absurd in this way each passing day. And now we have the release of all these Epstein files and all of the atrocities that are recorded therein. And I hate to sound like a negative person about this, but you know as well as I do, there's not going to be any accountability for any of that stuff.
No.
And that's the problem. We need to hold these people accountable for their actions, for the things they've done. And the problem is nobody's going to step up and do so because the people that are supposed to be the enforcers of the law that hold these people to account, well, they're all in on it. And that's the problem. So it's a shameful thing that they've turned this into a revelation of the method type of a practice with the release of these Epstein files. This is supposed to be something transformative that is supposed to really shake people out of their slumber and tell them, hey, you know what? We need to do something different. But the problem is people have become so complacent and so caught up in their own lives that they won't hold anybody to account for this stuff. So I think the best thing we could do is to not let it go, keep talking about it, and making people aware this is wrong on many levels, and we need to demand that some of these people be held accountable for the things they've done. But it's turning into more of the same playbook that they use all the time. It's becoming revelation of the method, and it's out there now, and it has its shock value. But over the course of time, what's going to happen is that shock value is going to start to disappear because people are going to be exposed to these kind of things more and more and accept that this is part of the reality. And thus, over the course of time, this begins to shift the Overton window and make this stuff more normalized. So it's going to normalize the violence, the occult ritual aspect of it, the dark side of things, the pedophilia, and all of it. And then people will still be complacent about it because, well, what are we going to do anyway? I'm only one person. What could I do? That'll be the attitude that prevails, and we see so much of that already with all of this type of stuff. But there's more of us than there are them, and that's what we need to come to grips with. And we need to demand accountability because at some point somebody's going to pay the piper. Something's going to happen, and whether it's the judgment of man falls on these people, or whether it's the divine judgment that falls upon all humanity because of it, at some point we're going to hit a reckoning phase with all of it. And it's all starting to hit the fan right now, and people need to figure out how do we proceed forward. And I don't have the answers to that. All I know is I'll talk about it and I'll point these things out and say it's wrong, and we need accountability. It's not just good enough to know they did this stuff and give them a pass like what's been done over and over and over again. Something needs to happen, and it's going to shift society and culture massively. But I'm also of the opinion, and we might want to discuss this in the second hour, that they're not going to let it get to that phase, that they're going to roll out some kind of a surprise to kind of shift the whole thing on its head coming up here. And it has everything to do with UAP or UFO disclosure. That's my viewpoint on it. So
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your
Yeah,
thoughts.
you have already seen that, when the tension with Iran came to the forefront, then all of a sudden nobody talked about the Epstein files anymore. And now, okay, we have another release, but we certainly do not have everything. And that is how they can shift attention as well. Yeah, and yes, I, I'm pretty sure something will come ahead that will shift the attention again. Yeah. So, yeah, this we have reached the top of the hour, and we will talk a little bit deeper in the second hour, and also how we can identify those influences in our modern day. We see the patrons on the other side.